Drop a comment below and make sure you're subscribed, because this one I've never told anyone. Not my mates, not my kids, not even my sister Margaret, who knows everything about me. But I'm telling you now, because enough time has passed, and because I think you need to hear it. My name is Graham. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working in commercial property law. Not the flashy end. Not the end with the Harborview offices and the Italian suits. The quiet end. Contracts. Covenants. The fine print that nobody reads until something goes terribly wrong. I retired 2 years ago to a small place in Havelock North, in the Hawke's Bay, with a view of Taimata Peak and a vegetable garden that keeps me humble. I grow courgettes that nobody asks for, and tomatoes that everyone does. I was married for 22 years to a woman named Diane. I want to be fair to her, even now. She was sharp. She was funny in that dry, sideways way that takes you a moment to catch. She could walk into a room and make it feel like the party had just started. In the early years, that quality felt like a gift. Later, I understood it differently. We met when I was 34 and she was 31. I was already deep in the work. She was in events, management, corporate functions, gala dinners, that sort of thing. We crossed paths at a conference I was attending on behalf of a client. She was running the logistics, and somewhere between the seating chart and the canapes, she made me laugh harder than I had in years. We married 18 months later. We had 2 children, a son, Daniel, now 30, and a daughter, Claire, now 27. For most of those 22 years, I believed we were happy. I was not always easy to live with. I know that. I was quiet in the way that lawyers get quiet, carrying other people's problems in your head, turning clauses over and over, like stones in a tumbler. I didn't bring flowers for no reason. I didn't plan surprises. I showed up. I paid the mortgage. I coached Daniel's rugby team on Saturday mornings for 6 years, even in the rain, which in Hawke's Bay is not a trivial commitment. I was present. I believed that being present was enough. I'm older now. I understand it isn't always. The dinner was in March, 11 years ago. Daniel had just finished his first year at Victoria. Claire was in year 12, and Diane had been working with a new client for about 4 months. A property development firm based in Auckland that was expanding into the Hawke's Bay region. She'd mentioned the lead partner a few times. His name was Rowan Ashford. She mentioned him the way you mention someone you find interesting. Once, casually. Then again. Then a third time, which is when you stop noticing consciously and start noticing in the back of your mind without knowing why. The dinner was a client appreciation event. Black tie. Held at a restored homestead property outside Havelock North. One of those places with a long gravel drive, fairy lights in the oak trees, and catering that makes you feel briefly like someone else. Diane had organized the event. I was her +1, which I didn't mind. I'd spent my career being the least visible person in any room. It was comfortable territory. I remember she looked beautiful that night. She'd had her hair done, and she was wearing a deep green dress I hadn't seen before. She was in her element, moving between tables, greeting people by name, making everything look effortless. I stood at the edge of the room with a glass of Central Otago Pinot and watched her work, and I felt proud of her. I want you to remember that. That's where I was, in that moment. I was proud. Rowan Ashford arrived late. He was the kind of man who arrives late on purpose. 50, perhaps 52, with the sort of tan that doesn't come from gardening. Silver hair. Not salt and pepper, properly silver. Maintained silver. The kind that costs money to look that natural. He wore his dinner jacket the way men do when they've been wearing dinner jackets since their 20s and have simply stopped thinking about it. He moved through the room like he owned it. To be fair to him, in a sense, he did. His firm had funded the development that made the event possible. I noticed him the way you notice weather. as information. Neutral. He reached Diane near the entrance to the main room, and she lit up. That's the only word for it. The color came into her face, and she laughed at whatever he said before he'd finished saying it. I noted it. I filed it somewhere I didn't examine. I told myself it was professional warmth. She was good at her job. This was part of her job. I was introduced to him 20 minutes later, near the drink station. "Graham," Diane said, in the tone she used when she was being careful. "This is Rowan. Rowan, this is my husband. Not Graham, my husband. Just my husband." I noticed that too. He looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you're deciding whether to move. A quick, efficient assessment. I was wearing my standard dinner suit, the one I'd had since 2007, still perfectly serviceable. And I was holding a glass of wine, and I was 63 kilograms and 5'10", and I had the hands of a man who filed documents for a living and drove a 2009 Subaru Forester with a cracked cup holder. "Lovely," he said. Not to me. At me. "The way you say lovely when you mean something else entirely." He turned back to Diane. I spent the next 2 hours talking to a structural engineer from Napier named Phil, who was interesting and decent and knew a remarkable amount about post-earthquake retrofitting. I ate the lamb. I drank moderately. I watched the room. At 9:30, I went to find Diane to ask if she was ready to leave. We'd said we'd be home by 10 for Claire's sake. She'd had an exam that week and we'd promised quiet. I found her on the terrace outside. She was standing close to Rowan Ashford. Not close enough to be obvious. Close enough to mean something. I stood in the doorway for a moment. She didn't see me. He was saying something low, and she was listening with her whole body leaning slightly in. Her glass held loose, her attention absolute. I had not had her attention like that in a very long time. And I knew it in that moment, the way you know something you've been refusing to name. I went back inside. I found Phil and talked to him for another 15 minutes. Then I went back out and I touched Diane's shoulder. And she turned and something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like interruption. Like I had walked into a room where I hadn't been expected. "Ready when you are," I said. In the car on the way home, she was quiet. Not unhappy quiet. Elsewhere quiet. I drove. I didn't ask. Claire was asleep when we got back. I made a cup of tea. Diane said she was tired and went to bed. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and the quiet of the house. And I thought about the look on Diane's face when Rowan Ashford had walked in. And I thought about the 22 years, and I thought about the way she'd said my husband without saying my name. I didn't sleep well that night. I want to tell you that I immediately became suspicious, launched an investigation, uncovered everything within a fortnight. That would make a cleaner story. The truth is messier. The truth is that I spent the next 3 months noticing things and explaining them away. More late evenings. More energy when she was talking about the Auckland project. A new perfume she said she'd bought for herself. A weekend conference in Wellington that she came back from quiet in a different way. Not elsewhere quiet, but careful quiet. Deliberate. I'm a lawyer. I know the difference between the absence of evidence and the evidence of absence. I started being more careful about what I looked at and when. The invoice is what did it, in the end. I wasn't looking for it. I was going through the home filing. We shared an account for household expenses, and there was a dinner charge to a restaurant in Wellington on the Saturday night of her conference. I knew that restaurant. I'd taken her there for our 15th anniversary. It wasn't the sort of place you went alone. It wasn't the sort of place you went with colleagues. I sat with that piece of paper for a long time. I did not shout. I did not confront her that night. I did not do anything. I went for a walk around the block in the dark, and I looked at Taimata Peak against the sky and I thought about what I actually knew versus what I suspected, and I thought about Claire, who was still at home, and I thought about 22 years, and I thought about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. I'm a careful man. I move slowly. It's not coldness. It's the way I'm built. When things matter, I take my time. I made an appointment the following week with a colleague I trusted, a family lawyer named Suzanne, who had offices in Napier and who I had referred clients to for 15 years. I didn't tell her what I suspected. I just asked her to walk me through the current property and relationship framework, specifically around assets held in complex structures. She did. She was thorough. I took notes. I had spent 31 years building a practice. I was a senior partner. Along the way, I had done well. Not spectacularly. Not by Rowan Ashford standards, but well. We owned the house in Havelock North outright. I had an interest in a commercial property in Napier that my firm held through a trust structure we'd established in 2004. I had a superannuation portfolio that I had never once mentioned at a dinner party, because it didn't seem like something to mention. I also, and this is the part that matters, had been, for 11 years, the external legal reviewer for the compliance documentation of a mid-sized property development consortium based in Christchurch. A silent position. Paperwork. The kind of work that sounds boring at a dinner party. The consortium had, in 2019, quietly acquired a 43% stake in a land development partnership in the Hawke's Bay. The lead operating partner of that development was a firm called Ashford Property Group. I want to be clear. I did not know this when I took the reviewing position. I had reviewed hundreds of documents over 11 years, and I had done so without ever examining whose name was at the top. Because that was not my job. My job was the compliance framework, the structures, the covenant, but I knew it now. I want to be equally clear about what I did next, because I think it matters for the story, to be honest. I did not take any action through the consortium. I did not use that position in any way. It would have been improper. I am a careful man. And I am an honest one. And those things were not going to change because my wife was having an affair. What I did do was review my own position. Thoroughly. The way you review a contract before you sign it. I went through everything, the trust documents, the property titles, the superannuation records, the accounts, and I made sure I understood exactly where I stood and exactly what was mine. Then I waited. I didn't wait passively. I had a conversation with Diane, not about Rowan, not directly. I told her that I'd been doing some thinking about the future, about what the next chapter looked like. I told her I wanted us to be honest with each other about where we were. I gave her an opening, a real one. She said she was happy. She said she thought we were fine. She looked me in the eye, and she said it. I nodded. I said I was glad to hear it. I made her a cup of tea. I thought about the restaurant in Wellington, and I thought about the invoice, and I thought about the way she'd said my husband without my name, and I understood that the conversation we needed to have was not going to happen on her terms or on her timeline. 3 weeks later, I contacted Suzanne again. This time, I told her everything. She was professional about it. She asked the questions lawyers ask. She gave me the framework. We talked for 2 hours. When I left her office, I walked down the main street of Napier in the afternoon sun, and I felt, for the first time in months, entirely calm. Not happy. Not relieved. Just clear. The way you feel after you've read something carefully enough to finally understand it. I went home. I cooked dinner, a roast chicken, because it was Sunday, and because Claire still liked coming home on Sundays. We ate together. We talked about Claire's plans, about Daniel's new flat in Wellington. Diane laughed at something Claire said, and for a moment it looked like any Sunday in the last 20 years. The next morning, I rang a locksmith. I want to stop here for a moment and talk about the envelope. Before the locksmith, before anything else, there was the envelope. I had made a decision that I wanted there to be no ambiguity. Not for Diane. Not for anyone who might ever look at this later. I went to my office. I sat down and I wrote a letter. Not a legal document. Not a formal notice. A letter. In my own handwriting. Because I think some things deserve to be handwritten. I told her what I knew. I told her when I had known it. I told her that I had not raised it earlier because I needed to be sure of my own mind before I was sure of anything else. I told her that I was not angry, and I meant that, which surprised me when I wrote it. I was not angry. I was finished. I told her that by the time she read the letter, I would have spoken to Suzanne, and that everything would be handled fairly and properly, and that I expected nothing less from her in return. I signed it with my full name. Graham Albert Sinclair. The way I signed legal documents. Because I wanted her to understand that this was real. I left the envelope on the kitchen table with a cup of tea still warm, and I went to work. She rang me at 11:17 that morning. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message once, and then I deleted it. Not because it was ugly, it wasn't, but because there was nothing in it that I needed to keep. The locks, Suzanne later told me, were not strictly necessary at that stage. She was right, legally speaking. But I'm a practical man, and I had Claire to think about, and I believe in clarity. New locks were clarity. Diane moved in with her sister in Taradale. We did not speak directly for 6 weeks. Everything went through Suzanne and Diane's solicitor, a man named Fletcher who was perfectly professional and whom I have no complaint about. The settlement took 4 months. It was thorough. Suzanne was very good. The house went to me. I had held the primary financial interest in it, and Diane agreed, with very little argument, that this was correct. Her interest in several shared accounts was resolved fairly. She was looked after. I wasn't trying to punish her. Punishment wasn't the point. I want to tell you about Rowan Ashford. Because you're probably wondering. I didn't go looking for it. I want to be honest about that. But when you spend 31 years reviewing property and development documentation, you develop a kind of peripheral vision for certain patterns. And the patterns I began to see around the Ashford Property Group, not through the consortium, not through any privileged access, just through the public record, through the registrar, through the documents that are simply there, if you know where to look. Those patterns told a story. The story was that Rowan Ashford had built his business on a particular kind of confidence. The confidence that comes from assuming nobody in the room is reading the fine print. He had, over the course of 15 years, structured and restructured a series of land development partnerships in ways that were technically compliant, but that carried significant exposure if anyone ever looked carefully at the beneficial ownership arrangements. He had, in particular, created a situation where his personal liability protections depended entirely on a set of representations made to a group of passive investors. Representations that I, having now read them carefully, found to be optimistic to the point of being misleading. I did not report this to anyone. That was not my place. I had no standing, and I had no brief. I was a retired solicitor reading public documents. What I did do, because this was within my standing, because this was simply a man doing his civic duty, was submit a detailed, factual, unsolicited written query to the company's office regarding a specific set of filings I had questions about. I did not include my name. I did not include my history with Diane. I included page references, document numbers, and 3 specific questions. I sent it on a Tuesday morning from my home office, with Te Mata Peak in the window and a cup of tea at my elbow, and then I went and staked my tomatoes. I don't know exactly what happened after that. I know what the public record shows. I know that 18 months later, 2 of Ashford Property Group's major development partnerships were placed under review by the relevant authority. I know that 2 institutional investors quietly withdrew from a proposed project in the Hawke's Bay. citing due diligence concerns. I know that Rowan Ashford sold his Havelock North residence a substantial property. I understand. With excellent views and relocated to Australia. I know these things because I read the Napier newspaper, which I have done every morning for 30 years. Diane and I have not spoken since the settlement. Not from bitterness, I genuinely bear her no bitterness. But some chapters close, and you respect the closing. I heard through mutual friends that things with Rowan Ashford did not continue. I was not surprised. Men like that are very attentive until their circumstances change. Daniel and Claire know the outline of what happened. I told them only what was necessary. They were adults. They handled it with more grace than I deserved, to be honest. Claire still comes for Sunday roast. Daniel rings every week. Usually on a Thursday. Usually to tell me something about his work that I only half understand and that I am enormously proud of regardless. I am 63 years old. I grow courgettes and tomatoes. And I have a dog named Arthur who has no opinion about property law. And I read on the veranda in the evenings when the weather allows, which in Hawke's Bay in autumn is more often than you'd expect. I am, I think, the happiest I have been in 20 years. Last spring, I was at the Havelock North Farmers Market a Tuesday. Quiet. Off-season. I was buying honey from a man I know slightly, a beekeeper who keeps hives up on the hill. The man next to me at the stall was someone I recognized vaguely, a solicitor from Hastings, younger than me, someone I'd seen at professional functions. He looked at me, and I could see him trying to place me, and then he did, and he said, "Graham Sinclair, you were with Hartley and Associates, weren't you? Commercial property?" I said I was. He said, "Didn't you do some work connected to the Ashford Review? I heard your name mentioned somewhere. I bought my honey." I thanked the beekeeper. I looked at the man from Hastings with the same expression I have used in 31 years of contract negotiations. Pleasant, unhurried, giving nothing away. "I read the newspaper," I said. "Like anyone." He laughed, a bit uncertainly. I walked home through the village in the autumn sun with my honey and my dog at my heel, and the peak above the town doing what it does standing there, enormous and calm, indifferent to everything below it. I thought about Rowan Ashford, who had walked into a room and looked at me like furniture. I thought about Diane and the green dress and the way the fairy lights had looked in the oak trees that March evening 11 years ago. I thought about the envelope on the kitchen table and the cup of tea still warm beside it. I thought about 31 years of reading things that other people assumed nobody would read. Power, I have learned, is not what it looks like at a dinner party. It does not walk in late, and it does not make a room feel like the party has started. It does not wear expensive silver hair, and it does not hand someone a dismissive glance and call it an introduction. Real power is quiet. It is patient. It knows where the covenants are. It knows what the fine print says when you've spent 3 decades being the person who reads it. There is no shame in being underestimated. It is, in fact, a considerable advantage. Be decent. Be patient. Read everything carefully. And remember it. And when someone mistakes your stillness for weakness, let them. Let them walk away confident. Let them believe the furniture has no view of the room. The view, I assure you, is excellent from here. If you've been sitting with something you don't know how to name, a slow erosion of something you thought was solid, I want you to know this. Clarity comes. Not always the way you expect it, and not always when you want it. But it comes, and when it does, you'll be ready for it if you've been honest with yourself about what you already knew. Thank you for listening. Leave a comment if this one stayed with you. I do read them. Every one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, send it to them. Sometimes a story is just a story, and sometimes it's the thing someone needed to hear before they were ready to start again.